Welcome to the Vintage Vibe. That's your heart. And I think it just skipped a beat because it's 1975 and you've just purchased a rare Kenwood Model 600 integrated amplifier. And for Kenwood, this was really their attempt at the high-end audio market. It was a departure from what they made before. These were beautiful, exclusive, and rare special order pieces that only a few had the chance to own.
Now, unfortunately, most people never expected these things would be as collectible as they have become 40 years later. And a lot of them ended up in, recycling piles, or even worse.
A case of beer, or in Canada, we called it 2-4, or in the 90s, home theater. And for the lucky few who kept them, this is why.
'Cause it's freaking awesome. That's why. Seriously though, we're going to talk about for the next, 15 minutes, why it was so freaking awesome that it deserved the name Supreme. And we're going to talk about some of its features. We're going to talk about, for those who are lucky enough to happen to find one, what you can expect to pay for one, what you can expect in terms of service. And for most of us that probably will never get a chance to put our hands on one of these because they are so rare. I mean, there was only about 1,000 of these ever made. And the guy, who traded for the case of beer, he still got it in his living room. Go figure. We'll talk about how it sounds and ultimately whether or not it deserves a place in your vintage audio collection. Stick around.
The Supreme was, let's say, advanced. Dual mono construction, left and right transformers. Now, dual mono at the time, you have to remember, was not mainstream. Kenwood made it mainstream. Over 72,000 UF of capacitance was utilized in the power supply. Now, this is heavy duty, so much so that modern amplifiers today, many of them would only dream of this. Now, the power transistors used, these were high-end Sakins. These were the finest available at the time. These were expensive then. These are expensive today. They used 2 pairs per channel to achieve low impedance stability or low impedance drive, as well as current capacities of 20 amps continuous or over 40 amps peak. Now, when you look at the preamp section, pretty much all JFETs throughout, metal film resistors for low noise, polystyrene capacitors, because hey, we're putting together the best. This made this amplifier quite unique sounding. I mean, the phono stage is basically all JFETs and some of the earliest uses of them in audio. Now, if we take a look here at the Alps 44-step potometer, this was exclusively made for Kenwood. And later you see this sort of thing in high-end Luxman, high-end Accuphase. I mean, this was the inspiration for that. This allowed for almost perfect balance between left and right channel. It is also a point of contention for future service.
So what does that mean in terms of power? This amplifier will pretty much drive whatever you throw at it. It's equipped to handle 3 sets of speakers, and although it's rated for 4 ohm use, the amplifier can sustain loads as low as likely 2 ohms or lower. The amplifier is rated at 130 watts per channel at 8 ohms and 150 watts per channel at 4 ohms. On the bench though, the Supreme 600, the Model 600, achieves more like 150 watts per channel at 8 ohms and over 170 watts per channel at 5 ohms. So this is, for the time, an extremely powerful amplifier, integrated amplifier, that really competes with a lot of separates at the day. And again, exclusive and exquisitely built. Let's take a peek at some of the features of the amplifier.
You've got 7 inputs on the 600, 2 of them being phono. We'll come back to that. You have a unique loudness circuit, which gives you 4 different options, plus a presence switch and multiple turnovers and filters, as well as your typical bass and treble controls. A lot of time and quality put into manufacturing this, a nicely engraved faceplate, good quality switches and knobs throughout, a good weight or feel in your hand. The actual volume control, again, 44 steps, so individual adjustments. And in the back, a nice smooth balance control, very accurate. I had some issues with the attenuator on mine. It had to get rebuilt. We'll talk about that shortly.
Let's go a little bit deeper into some of the features on the Model 600, starting with the phono stage. Now, I mentioned that Kenwood really did pay attention to designing a great phono stage. For example, all JFETs throughout in the construction. They were really concerned with how your records were going to sound on the Model 600. And I'm telling you right now, they will sound fantastic on this amplifier. Not only do you have, again, a well constructed phono stage, but you have variable impedance selections for your cartridge or your cartridge loading. So if you're using moving magnet, you can select between 30, 50, or 100 kilo ohms. If you're using moving coil, there are provisions for moving coil on the amplifier as well as a gain control, which would have been probably something you would have used if you're making a mixtape or something to get the record levels right. You know, there was a time in the 70s and the 80s when making mixtapes was cool. And if you're still in the tapes, well, you've got that feature. Now, the loudness control is something not to be overlooked. I want to stop and talk about this a little bit more because if you've ever had a vintage amplifier, for me, more times than not, you select loudness and it's too much bass and it kind of feels boomy or it feels exaggerated or something just sounds off in the mid-range. And sometimes it's dependent on your room. Sometimes it's dependent on the speakers you're using. So to be able to select a little bit of loudness, a little bit more, a little more, or a lot is a real neat feature to be able to have. Now, it also had something called a presence control. Now, this is reminiscent of the 50s and 60s where amplifiers had contour switches where it would add a little extra brilliance, for example, to the top end or to the bottom end. Now, if you still can't get it right, good news is that the bass and the treble controls on it, you can select left and right channel separately. There you go. And now you know.
How does it sound? Well, let's turn it up and let's talk about that next.
In one word, spectacular. Now, to go a little deeper than just spectacular, it has a generally neutral sound signature to it, but it has that little bit of vintage warmth that we've kind of come to love in these older masterpieces. And I think the JFETs that are used in this primarily are probably responsible for that. And it's a very engaging, deep sounding amplifier. It brings you into the music. It's got great bottom end control. It's got great mid bass presence. It's not overly bright or anything like that. And it kind of reminds me of taking a tube preamplifier and mating that with a solid state power amplifier, a hybrid. You gain a little bit of warmth to what's already great, with your favorite solid state amplifier. That's how I would describe the sound of the Kenwood Model 600.
In terms of service, I always start with clean the unit, and it was fairly easy to get the faceplate off, clean everything down with some light detergent, clean up that faceplate, bring back a little bit of shine. Again, cleaning behind the faceplate with light detergent, toothbrush to get all of the grime and the dust out. Now, the power bulb is a common failure. Again, good thing is it's easy to desolder and replace with a new one. You can see here kind of in the center, dead center, the blue potometer. It looks like a bunch of squares stacked together. That is a point of contention. It does start to wear a little bearing that's in there, so you lose the clicking motion of the stepping in the volume. And it was, for me, a problem of fading in and out of left and right channel. Now, in the next shot here, it's hard to kind of see, but there are a lot of capacitors in the tone board, and some of those did fail, and you can expect that you'll probably have to replace some yourself.
The only other thing that you're going to have to expect like with any vintage piece, is you're going to take a little bit of time to clean the switches, the potometers, all the controls, and you can expect that with this Kenwood too. I mean, they do have kind of little felt pads that are behind the faceplate to help prevent dust from getting into the controls, but they do oxidize and they will click and pop and become staticky with time. It's fairly easy to get into them, as you've seen on this picture right here. A lot of them are exposed on the top of the amplifier, and those that you can't get at from the top, you can get at from the backside. But generally speaking, it's a pretty darn robust amplifier, and chances are if you find one, it's probably working.
In 2021, anywhere between about $1,200 to $1,500 would be reasonable for one of these. If it's restored, expect to pay a little bit more. And at that price point in Canadian dollars, you can still put aside some dollars for the service that you might need to do to bring it back to its original splendid condition.
Does it deserve a place in your vintage audio collection? Heck, this is the centerpiece of your vintage audio collection. And if you can find one, grab one, because there's not many of these or the European version, the bronze-faced equivalent, the model 650, around anymore. Hope you enjoyed our show. Don't forget to join us next time, and like and subscribe.